Hello and thank you for watching my presentation. I will present Mugido, a poetry collection by Brazilian poet Marília Floôr Kosby, and the forms of breathing with it presents. And then I will do a brief comment on Máquina 1, Machine 1, a performance by Brazilian artist Gabriella Mureb. I want to highlight the exhalations of women and cows in Mugido as a form of breathing with, and point out Mureb's performance as a form of suffocating with. In both works, breathing fosters the acknowledgement of others within the same atmosphere. In Mugido, you exhale with others. In Máquina, you cannot inhale with others. The invitation to present in this panel came at the end of a 5-year period as a foreigner in Sweden studying North American ecopoetry, and gave me the opportunity to work with ecopoetry in Portuguese language, which was like breathing fresh air and returning home. I use breathing here as a metaphor for being immersed in this poetry, in its wailings for environmental disruption, and in its exhalations that expand the cultural models for nature, human, other organisms, and inorganic agents with which ecopoetry relates. But I also use breathing in the literal bodily sense of exchanging gases, chemicals, and sounds within an atmosphere. Like holding your breath underwater, reading atmospheric North American ecopoetry extended my sentences, demanded more air, extended my lungs. Some poets ask you to perform breathing with a poem, guiding you through metrics, others that you notice where and with what you are breathing. So now, turning to ecopoetry in Portuguese language as part of my postdoc project, I am asking, who breathes? Where does she breathe? What does she breathe? How does she breathe? And in contrast, who suffocates? Where and why does she suffocate? And these questions are concerning the atmospheres of Brazilian and other Ibero-American countries. So this presentation is the very beginning of my current research project on breathing, and so I will share more interrogations than conclusions. My project fits with the atmospheric turn in the environmental humanities, a turn from the geological focus for thinking about entanglements and interrelations between humans and the planet. With this turn, discussion of how lives and materialities in and off the air represent specific forms of human and non-human intertwining are starting to take place. Notions of aerial communities are extending to microorganisms, toxins, and chemicals, making the atmosphere a complex biological entity. Some examples of this turn include the collection life of air and intersectional breathing matters. Contributing to this turn, I focus on respiration, because it shows air as exchange rather than medium. Atmospheres are also created by this exchange, and post-colonial formulations of atmospheres as settler spaces and spaces of toxic inequality show how breath relates physiology with cultural constructions of subjectivity. Accordingly, breath as a political practice is extended to formulations of the atmospheres as a social construct, also produced by political projects of resistance, struggles, and living experiences. So coming from an European and North American academic background, I feel the need to decolonize my readings, my approach, my critical setup when working with Brazilian ecopoetry. Mugido shares this premise by proposing an ecopoetics of mooing, meaning that to moo is to infuse language with breath, to destructure its solid formations, to extrude its solidity, to expand its articulations, to do an epistemic critique. Here is an example from the first poem, titled a soft mooing that in other parts of the collection becomes a hard scream. In this example that opens the collection, this articulation of inherent models for nature, humans, other organisms and inorganic agents is equaled to mooing, thus asking for translation of language of cows and also pointing out communalities. The poet cow moos and breaks distinctions of species. By mooing, cows and women breed together and create ties of care. They disrupt language and structures of meaning. And we can read here that mooing was the chosen action for this disarticulation. That melody, all that effort of throat, eye, stomach, tongue, rumen. So to moo is to breathe, which is to disarticulate epistemic structures, in this case through language. Because of this exercise, then, the poetry collection can be read as ecopoetry, which is a poetry that engages with non-traditional modes of representing nature, that questions categories of natural and artificial, and relates with the materiality of the Anthropocene. Formally, Mugido uses quotations, scientific texts, varied sources from the social and the natural sciences, such as anthropology and veterinary, and therefore expands traditional poetic modes and genres of relation with nature, such as the journal, the lament, and the lyric. Mugido also questions categories of natural and artificial by thematically interrelating bodies with atmospheres. In this collection, entanglement of bodies of different species through breathing happens in the rural communities of Rio Grande do Sul and the intricate relations between cows, bulls, and humans by which they are formed. Breathing is thus the vehicle for the recognition of connection with others, and lungs and atmospheres become social spaces that show interconnection between those that compose it. And I want to acknowledge that the sources I'm pointing out here, the critical sources, are all either North American or European. So, considering Mugido as a critical source, right now this would be my critical source for an epistemic critique of ecopoetry from Brazil. This is, in that sense, this makes this a mooing exercise. So cows and women breathe together in the poems of Mugido, and they moo, they exhale. And here are some of those exhalations. The Thank God, released by the poet as doula, and Jacqueline, the owner of the cow, when the body of a stillborn calf goes through the vulva of the cow giving birth, that both women are opening with their hands. Or the moment when Jacqueline vociferates against her neighbor's idea of beheading the cow in pain, of taking away her breath, suffocating her. So when giving birth, mooing, breathing heavily, tongues of cow and women leave their open mouths. In Marilia's poems, to speak is to moo, scream, pant, exhale. It is in these moments of breathing together, either in the same space during labor, either in the wider geography of the rural communities of Rio Grande do Sul, that cows and women create atmospheres where they conspire and co-breathe. In Marilia's poetry collection, then, breathing is thus a practice of creating and mending communal ties between and among species in this geography. The proximity between violence exerted to female bodies of both species is recognized in their breathing together. Healing happens in these moments. Pain of labor, which in many cases can be fatal for cows, is relieved. Jacqueline does not eat animals. Marilia does not write as an European. In contrast, Máquina, Machine, by Gabriella Mureb, focuses on suffocating to bring awareness of connection with others in toxic atmospheres. This is a 20-minute long performance, which is the time limit for people in a closed space not to suffocate from inhalation of carbon monoxide. For the performance, Gabriella Mureb turned on 20 Honda GX 160 motors during 20 minutes. Audience was asked to sign an authorization form and to wear special glasses and masks during the performance. Carbon monoxide is a colorless, odorless, tasteless, flammable gas, and an air polluted resulting from industrial activity. Once inhaled, CO attaches to the hemoglobin in the red blood cells. Hemoglobin normally carries oxygen throughout the body. So when CO attaches, it blocks the oxygen the body must have, creating a wide range of health problems. So suffocating together during these 20 minutes, audience members were led to focus on their lack of breath and in the loss of oxygen in connection to atmospheric pollution. This recreation of toxic atmospheres is also an example of acknowledging atmospheres as spaces of oppression, where breathing is not possible, and as settler spaces. And thus, Máquina raises questions of environmental justice and toxic inequalities needed to understand how breathing happens differently according to location, class, gender, race, and disability, or because of air inequality, or of different access to oxygen and of respiratory afflictions. These inequalities became particularly visible during these COVID-19 pandemics, in which on January 14 this year, the Brazilian city of Manaus depleted its oxygen storages, leading to deaths from suffocation of COVID-19 patients. A final reading, therefore, is that the creation of communities of breathing and suffocating in these works are ways of apprehending and resisting persistent colonial structures by bringing acknowledgement of others, demanding shared languages, even across species, and creating atmospheres and spaces of relation other than those of such structures. By sharing the creation of atmospheres through breathing together, Mugido also proposes a co-option of the forms of creating atmospheres. By showing suffocation as form of relation with toxic atmospheres, Máquina highlights communal entanglement with them. In both works, breath as political practice is extended to formulations of the atmosphere as a social construct, and they both differently suggest the production of atmospheres by political projects of resistance, struggles, and living experiences. I tentatively suggest, then, that communal breathing and suffocating can, in these works, and especially in Mugido, thus be a healing practice connected to an epistemic critique of prevalent North American and Eurocentric universal models of nature and the human. As I mentioned before, an ecopoetic of mooing results from this healing that is also an epistemic critique. Answering to what are the knowledges produced by mooing is the work ahead. Thank you.